He came to power with a promise to change. 100 days of Modi, and we've seen markets at record highs and corporate sentiment more buoyant than ever before. But what has changed on the ground? Is this euphoria for real? Let's find out from three of the brightest minds in corporate India in our special show, 100 Days of Modi, the Corporate Scorecard. Joining us on this show, Kiran, Mazumdar, Ashok, Keki, Mistry, and Seshasayee. Thank you so much for joining us right here on ET. Now, Kiran, I want to start off with you. What has changed really on the ground other than sentiment?
Apart from positive sentiment, I think the approach to the whole aspect of formulating policies, of really addressing some of the current day challenges seems to be taking a very different approach and shape. Because I can clearly see that this government wants to have a very deep understanding of what needs to be fixed, because I think there's a clear indication that the current system has been found to be broken. And I think they're trying to fix the system before they roll out policies. At least that's the signal and impression that we are clearly getting from the way this government is functioning. So I think there's a lot of thought going into this. I certainly see a lot of engagement from the government in terms of getting feedback and views and inputs into what needs to be done. And I think they're looking at this through a very clear strategy of how to get things moving.
Right, Mr. Seshasayee, there was this expectation of big bang reforms. Clearly that hasn't happened in these 100 days. But what, according to you, has changed in these 100 days other than the sentiment, of course?
Of course, the global climate, the global winds have been favorable, both literally and figuratively. Literally because monsoons have not been as bad as it was originally feared, and also that in a figurative way, the global market sentiment has been positive, which has resulted in this phenomenal flow of funds into both the equity market and the debt instruments. Obviously, that's not something which you should give credit to the government, but this is the overall ambience within which the government has operated, where I will definitely give credit to the government in this short time period is giving the directions in which the government is moving. And I'll make this example of the manufacturing for export. That's a chapter heading. The fact that this needs to be followed up with the detailing of the policies with regard to the SEZ and so on and so forth have to follow. But I think the chapter headings are clear. And what I will also give credit is that the detail level implementation, the plumbing that needs to be done, the electrical wiring that needs to be done in the place, that is being attended to. And I can say with the personal experience, that particularly in the power and coal ministries, a lot of approvals which had been held up are being hastened, and you see action on the ground. And that, I think, is certainly the right way to go.
Mr. Mistry, comment on that. You know, ahead of the budget, you said the mood has never been this good in a long, long time. How much credit would you give this government for the euphoria in markets? Or do you think it's largely due to favourable cues that we're getting, both in terms of a better than expected monsoon and, of course, crude prices softening?
I would say a very large part of the credit has to go to the government. Of course, there have been external factors which have also helped. As you said, crude prices have been lower, monsoons have been better than expected. But I think a significant portion of the credit has to go to the government. The kind of euphoria that was created when the BJP came to power, the kind of the unprecedented level of seats that they won in the elections, were all pointers towards the fact that we expected a strong government, a decisive government, and whatever action the government has taken over these last few days, last 3 months, a little over 3 months, clearly demonstrates the fact that the government means business. They are keen to get along with the reform process. They are focusing on some of the right things. They are focusing on things like infrastructure creation. They are focusing on things like, addressing supply side issues which are constantly creating inflationary pressures in the economy. So they're doing the right things. Project approval, process of getting approval for projects is being expedited. Ministries are working a lot harder. Time limits have been set for getting approvals in place. So all that is obviously helping a lot and improve, and all this together has led to huge improvement in sentiments.
I want to address each of those issues in greater detail with all of you, but let's start with the hits first, the big hits that we've seen in the last 100 days. Ms. Kiran Mazumdar, would you agree that there's been a more concerted effort in reviving the infrastructure piece? That's been the big concern. Do you see a bigger thrust on the infra story?
Absolutely. I think there's a very clear and strong focus on infrastructure development. I think there is a strong focus on developing the so-called industrial corridors that we've been talking about. I think, there is a lot to be, understood in terms of the clear signals the government is giving in terms of clearing mega projects.
Mr. Seshasayee, the other visible change is the functioning of the bureaucracy. One gets the feeling that the bureaucracy is far more energized. It's been empowered to take decisions. How much of an upside could there be to administrative efficiency that could kick in now?
I think there's a phenomenal uptick that's possible with the administrative efficiency. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that what really came in the way of India's growth story in the last 4 or 5 years was this administrative paralysis. Now, that may have been occasioned by a number of factors, including overreach by judiciary and so on and so forth, and media activism, all of that maybe. But clearly, the fact that administrative energy is back now will clearly make a difference. But having said this, Sandeep, I think I would also wait for some real tests to happen when the political leadership will stand behind the bureaucracy and then say, in this testing period, we are behind you, so you're not going to be let down. That, I think, would reinforce the empowerment that we are beginning to see.
That's a fair point, and I want to elaborate on this whole policy paralysis argument. Mr. Mistry, what created the policy paralysis in the first place was judicial overreach, institutional activism, like Mr. Seshasayee pointed out. And many would say that hasn't quite changed. It's almost deja vu with the cold case verdict from the Supreme Court. It feels a lot like the 2G days. What has changed really on that front?
I think what caused really the policy paralysis was the fact that, and this is my sense, that over the last 3 years, the bureaucrats were blamed for a number of things. And as they got blamed for things which they perceived were, there's nothing wrong that they had done, it created a sense of inactivity. People were not clearing files. Files were stuck for long periods of time. That motivation that the bureaucracy needs, I think they have got now. But yes, you're right. Some of the judgments of the regulatory bodies, the courts, and all have been, have created their own sense of worry amongst people. But having said that, these are explicit to certain sectors, explicit to certain industries. But broadly speaking, for India as a whole, industry is sentiments within the industrial circles are very, very strong.
Ms. Shah, comment on the point on administrative efficiency. You may be sitting in Bangalore, but you do engage a lot with New Delhi. Would you say there's been a more consultative approach to policy making? Take the case of gas pricing, stakeholders being consulted, a committee of secretaries is evaluating the proposal in the first place. Is that the way to go across sectors, would you say?
Unless there is going to be stakeholder consultation on every policy decision, I'm afraid that we will constantly have trial and error kind of policies coming out of even this government. There are many areas where there is still very little stakeholder consultation, and I would like to see that improve. I know that in the healthcare and pharma sector, there is very, very minimal stakeholder consultation. Even in the area of science and technology, I would like to see much greater stakeholder consultation. So whereas it is happening in other sectors, where the ministers are taking a huge proactive step in making this happen, in many other sectors, I'm afraid this is not happening. We need to see those ministers also take the same approach to stakeholder consultations, like in our sector. In our sector, I'm sorry, it is still very, very poor and suboptimal.
And you have been pretty vocal about that as well, Ms. Shah, haven't you? But let's talk about some of the other issues as well. Let's take FDI reforms. Many would see it as a big hit as far as this government's performance is concerned. But Mr. Seshasayee has a slightly different take on that. Are you disappointed that the government hasn't quite walked the full distance? Given the kind of political capital that this government has, surely it could have allowed majority foreign ownership in defence and insurance. Why did it have to stop midway?
No, on the contrary, I think I made the statement perhaps in your channel earlier on. I actually think that it is much more prudent to go step by step rather than risking going all the way in one dollop, because you must remember that while the political party in power has majority in the parliament and of course does not have to worry about the minority political parties holding it to ransom, don't forget that there is still 60-odd% of voters who did not vote for this party, and that expression in the streets is a factor that they have to keep in mind, and I think they are very conscious of that. And that's why I think there is a more deliberate, step-by-step, feel your way kind of approach, and I think it's a right approach, because you've got to make it sustainable and tenable.
Mr. Mistry, do you agree with Mr. Seshasayee on the need to have a calibrated approach to FDI reforms, to opening up sectors? Surely you would have liked the government to have allowed majority foreign ownership in insurance, for instance.
See, we need to really understand that the government's had little over 3 months to sort of, bring out some of these reforms. So a lot of these policies will evolve over the next few months. What is critical at this point of time, whilst FDI and all is very welcome, and we need FDI, what is critical at this point of time in a young country like ours is to get the investment climate growing. Because unless the investment cycle starts and people start investing in creation of new facilities, creation of new plant and machinery, starting new businesses, you will not create jobs. And in a young country like ours, creation of jobs should be paramount, should be number one, should be the most important thing. And if jobs get created, then because we are a domestic economy, people will consume, people will spend money, that consumption will lead to demand, demand will lead to, more manufacturers producing goods, and therefore more jobs getting created. So I think whilst broad policies on FDI, broad policies on many of these issues are important, but they are not, they are not something that need to be done in the first 100 days. I think the most important thing that was happening in India was that the investment climate had become so, in terms of ease of doing business. India was ranked some 134th out of some 189 odd countries. So people were not investing. Indian businessmen were not investing money into India, and a lot of Indian businessmen were talking of making their investments outside of India. So the most critical thing to my mind was to get that sentiment going, improve the sentiment, get people to get the confidence to start doing businesses in India. And I'm sure that over the next 6 months, you will get a more you'll get a more stable, a more pragmatic policy on FDI. And hopefully, if this insurance bill gets cleared in the December session, that by itself can get a little more than $2.5 to $3 billion of money into India. But we must also recognize that the rupee has appreciated. Rupee has been one of the strongest currencies in recent times, and we have seen so much of foreign money coming into India.
On that note, we'll slip into a short break here on this special edition of 100 Days of Modi. We'll be right back with our experts in just 2 minutes from now. Welcome back. You're watching the special telecast on 100 Days of Modi. A big move by the government to scrap the Planning Commission and kind of redo it entirely. What are you watching out for there?
Well, certainly I think, the Planning Commission has basically lost its relevance because it was basically a think tank that nobody listened to, unfortunately. Basically, they did not have the empowerment or enablement to really implement what they were basically pronouncing. So I think here the Prime Minister is clearly saying that what we really need is a strategic think tank that really tells us what needs to be done and then how it should be delivered. And I think the Prime Minister also wants this new forum or think tank or vision group or strategy group or whatever you want to call it to really ensure that there is delivery, there is implementation, there is monitoring, there is tracking in delivering on a strategy. I think that's what they're trying to look at.
Fair point. That was the key highlight of the Prime Minister's Independence Day address, wasn't it? The other key highlight, of course, was his clarion call for manufacturing. Come make in India. Mr. Seshasayee, you're an expert on that. Is that enough? Just a slogan, is it enough? Or do you get a feeling that this government is serious in its intent to attract big-ticket manufacturing investments?
Firstly, there's no choice. I think if we have to get manufacturing to contribute significantly to GDP, no matter what number we're talking about, if we see manufacturing growth happening, it can only happen on the basis that we manufacture for the rest of the world. Because remember that there is no shortage of manufactured goods. The demand within the country is being met by the supply. And therefore, the only way that you can get the output to go up is to supply for the demand from the rest of the world. So it's not a choice, firstly. Second, yes, I fully agree that sloganeering is not going to deliver us from evil. I think a lot of very hard work needs to be done. We have to put in place the policy framework. We have to resolve a number of irritants which are in the system, issues relating to taxation or labor laws and all of that. And more importantly, the infrastructure, the hardware that is necessary to attract, including the port capability to handle traffic. So there is a lot of very hard work to be done, which is why I said that I like the signpost in terms of direction that we are taking. But if you are saying that what you see is just a signpost and there is no road as yet, but road takes a long time to build, but a signpost is easy to put in place, and that's what you've seen, and which is good.
Fair point. Ms. Shaw, how easy is it going to be, or how tough is it going to be for this government to build that road that Mr. Seshasayee pointed out? For the government to be able to attract manufacturing investment, it needs to work on land, labour reforms. Given the whole, politics of populism, which many believe is here to stay, how tough is it going to be for the government to move?
Let's look at it in two ways. I think on one side, you must understand a lot of these populist policies or social welfare policies that are being stated and enunciated are also at state levels. So I think it depends and varies from state to state. You are seeing bold labour reforms being announced by state governments like Rajasthan. You are going to see other state governments also come out with bold policies. So whilst there is a politics of populism which many state governments are still going to adhere to, and it's also non-BJP led states which are also indulging in this politics of populism. But having said that, I think the government at a very broad macro level are very committed to making sure that they get fiscal prudence back into the economic structure. I think they're very, very conscious of the fact that they need to cut back on a lot of these populist measures, but at the same time, I think inclusive development has to be a focus. So you've got to make sure that you balance the book, so to speak, by ensuring that the poorest get, the needs of the poor get addressed, but at the same time you balance and offset it with certain other measures that actually bring strong revenues into the exchequer.
That's a fair point. But Mr. Mistry, comment on that. Irrespective of whether these reforms happen or not, do you still get a feeling that because of the change in sentiment and because of the whole economic environment, corporate India is about to start investing again? When will we see those big ticket investments from India Inc.?
See, when we talk to people in business, when we talk to people in industry, and these are not necessarily only the biggest of big industries, they're also smaller industries, we clearly get the feeling that people are relooking at their business plans. They are sort of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, looking around for preparing business plans. We need to understand that the elections have got over and the government has come in only in May. And it's not going to happen that the next month or within 2 months people will start actually putting out hard cash. But a lot of people are looking around for capital. If you talk to the investment bankers will tell you that a number of companies are out in the market looking at raising funds, whether it is capital, whether it is debt, more capital today than debt. And I'm sure that over the next 2 quarters or 3 quarters, the investment cycle, the actual investment cycle will start taking off, and you will start seeing hardcore investments taking place.
You did, speak about the fiscal policy earlier as well. Are you disappointed at the continuity that we're seeing in policy making? The fact that the government chose to stick to fiscal targets that not everybody thought was credible, and more importantly, when do you see rates dropping? Because that's something that corporate India is going to be closely watching out for.
I would say that on the fiscal front, I'm not particularly disappointed. The finance minister has said this. He's continued to keep the target of 3%. I think it is in 2017 fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit numbers are coming down. If I recall right, we were 5.6% a couple of years ago, and this year my sense, if I recall right, was around 4.7. So those numbers are coming down. Now coming to inflation and coming to interest rates, the central bank, I think, has done a fantastic job in terms of controlling the demand side of the equation. But if you look at inflation, inflation has two sides, supply and demand. And whilst RBI has done a great job on the demand side, RBI cannot really tackle supply side issues. Supply side issues have to be tackled by the government. And I think that is one of the biggest positives, that the government has actually taken some very constructive steps in terms of tackling the supply side issues which are causing inflation. We also need to understand that this is not something which will come into place in the next 1 quarter, or for that matter 1 year or 1.5 years. It's going to take a period of 2, 3, 4 years before you start seeing the effect of all the investments that the government is encouraging in the infrastructure space in order to bring down or in order to tackle some of the supply side issues, which over a period of time will tackle inflation. So my sense is RBI will not be able to cut interest rates very sharply. Having said that, if RBI is perceiving, and I'm sure they are, that the government is on its bit trying to do what it can to revive the investment cycle, RBI may feel that it may, to help the government to facilitate the investment cycle, to improve sentiment further, RBI could look at dropping rates marginally, 0.25% over the next 6 months. But it can never be a structural reduction in rates, because inflation in India, till supply side issues are really tackled, will keep recurring.
Right. Mr. Seshasayee, I want to ask the same question to you. Are you disappointed in the continuity that we're seeing in policy making, maybe on the fiscal policy, and also, as far as, say, the government stance in WTO for that matter, would you say that's a bit of a disappointment?
Of the two subjects that you touched on, one in terms of retaining the fiscal deficit, I think that was more of a gamble. Hoping that the equity market will support this gamble, and perhaps the finance minister was quite right in taking that very well-informed gamble. But on the WTO, I think I have a different take on that. I think that perhaps was not a very good thing to happen in the context of buoying up the sentiment in the overseas market. But all said and done, this will be interpreted as another retrospective legislation, because India would be seen, and I'm not saying that we have, but be seen to have gone back on what was committed. Perhaps there were more, I would say, expedient solutions to this problem, and perhaps that we took a hard line at the risk of hurting sentiments. But fortunately, I don't think the fallout has been that great. I feared that perhaps the fallout would be even more, but fortunately the investor sentiment has not been too badly affected. But I wish it had not been done.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Seshasayee, if you were to summarize 100 days of this government, would you say long on vision, long on intent, but short on detailing?
Well, I think we are running way ahead of the curve in terms of our expectations, and that's been a constant worry. And perhaps to some extent the pre-election discourse has also taken this to an unmanageable heights, and therefore there is an issue. And therefore we are expecting that we will have not merely the chapter headings within the 100 days, but chapters being written. So therefore there is this unavoidable sense of disappointment, the creeping in the corners. So it's a worry. But having said that, I don't think that the government would be well advised to rush into details, because that's where, as you know, and I know, the devil resides. So I would rather that they take the time to put this in place, which then becomes inscrutable, unchangeable and sustainable.
Ms. Shaw, do you agree with that assessment? Is 100 days too early to judge a government?
No, first and foremost, I think this 100 days that we're looking at the new government has to be viewed very differently from the way we've been, judging various governments, whether they are state governments, whether it is the previous government, because I think all governments believe that in the first 100 days they need to come up with a slew of policy announcements. But this is not the way this government is looking at it. So I think yes, it is too early to judge what this new government is going to do, because they are in it for the long haul. And they do not want to come out with, piecemeal kind of announcements or policies, because I think they want to do it in a much bigger way. So I think their mandate is getting to be clearly focused on getting things fixed before they really roll out big policy announcements.
Running out of time, so let me just get closing comments from all our panelists. Let's rate this government on its 100 days. Mr. Mistry, to you first, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the first 100 days of this government?
I would say it's a good, I would say if I would give it a very good rating. If you're saying 1 to 10 and if you're saying 1 is on the low side and 10 is on the high side, I would say something like 7.5 to 8, probably 8.
Okay, 7.5, probably 8. Miss Kiran Mazumdar Shah, what's your sense? How would you rate 100 days of Modi on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would say that, given what I'm seeing today, I would sort of rate it anywhere between 6 and 7 right now.
Right, Mr. Seshasayee, we'll let you have the last word on this then. Kiran Mazumdar Shah has rated this government as anywhere between 6 to 7. What's your rating?
No, I don't know when we can avoid this rating business, but yeah, since you want to close it with that, I would go along with Kiran.